Hello, it's day 129. Let's go.
Bienvenidos a la grieta del invocador. Se han generado súbditos.
Debería pensar un juego nuevo. Uno en el que los humanos no regresen. Contiene reglas, pero paso. Voy a salir de todas formas. Acabamos de entender un sentido que no tiene, así que tratamos de compartir esto con vosotros.
Asesinato doble enemigo.
obtendrá chiribitas. Nadie que sea libre tiene una travesura.
Racha del enemigo. Destrucción enemiga.
No mires a un dios a los ojos.
Ha
Ni
muerto
te
un
cerca
aliado.
de sus oídos.
Se acabó.
A todos nos llega el día en el que cumplimos. El tiempo es como una ola.
No tenías nada que hacer contra un ángel resucitado.
Hay agujeros en la realidad.
Un enemigo está dominando.
sido destruida.
Mira, tenemos una cosa que es como el Jingle y el Jangor y gira de manera proyectiva hasta cruzarse en la cuarta dimensión. Pero no es una función medible, es como... Me gusta este mundo. Espero que siga. Hola a todos. Veamos, llegará un cambio con... ¿A qué es divertido?
Ha muerto un aliado. Vuestra torreta ha sido destruida. Un enemigo es legendario.
¿Será útil?
Racha del enemigo. Vuestra torreta ha sido
duermo.
destruida.
¡Llega el juicio final!
Vuestra torreta ha sido destruida.
Habéis cabreado a mi caballo. Mala idea.
Vuestra torreta ha sido destruida.
¿Alguien quiere meterse hasta los tobillos en ese libro? ¿Alguien?
Racha del enemigo.
¿Quieres ver a cómo va?
enemigo está dominando. Vuestra torreta ha sido destruida.
Four and a half years. Hello everyone and welcome to my guide on how to play Zoe. If you don't know who I am, I'm Shock. I was ranked 84 Korean Challenger and I also played Pro Play for 4.5 years. In this video, I'll give you absolutely everything you need to know in order to start playing Zoe. So we're going to go over runes, items, matchups, when you pick her, and also just Zoe's identity, like what is Zoe actually good at? So let's start with that, Zoe's identity. I think that Zoe she's kind of a burst slash poke mage. While there are a couple different ways you can build her, realistically, you're mostly there to chunk out squishies. If you get really fed, you can chunk out the tanks as well, but Zoe tends to struggle against some of the tankier targets. And when we talk about when to pick her, that'll definitely come up. She is a great champion for solo queue though. It's super easy to snowball in this champ. She's excellent in any sort of like skirmish or river fight. Honestly, the biggest downside of Zoe is her difficulty. Even for good players, she's not a super consistent champion because she is quite skill shot reliant. Obviously, if you're really good at her, you can offset some of that. And for sure, actually, I think Zoe, from what I remember, is one of the most one-trick champs in Challenger. So it's clearly very, very successful, but it's not easy by any means. It's going to take some time. And I remember when I was learning this champ, I had a lot of issues at first. So I'll talk about those. I'll talk about some of the common mistakes and the things that I was doing wrong when I was learning Zoe. But just bear that in mind, it's not a champion for the faint of heart by any means. So starting with items. The first item, I really do believe that Ludens is the only great option. I'll talk about some of the others, but let's talk about why Ludens is good. So for Zoe, obviously she is a poke champ. Ludens just makes sense with that. It's going to be the most useful proc. The other options you can look for is you can go for Blackfire, which I have in the situational items over here. The thing is though, the Blackfire stats are quite good for Zoe, but the Blackfire active, or the burn on it, the passive rather, is not particularly useful. It's hard for you to get full value out of it, and the Ludens passive is going to out damage it most of the time. Ludens can also be kind of nice for helping with your wave clear. If you enter the mid game and you're not super fed, sometimes Ludens is the difference between being able to kill that wave or not. So I think that's the thing. Now, there are other first items you could go. For example, you could drop a mana item altogether and play something like first item Storm Surge. I don't really like this. I think that The problem is, I don't think Storm Surge is a great item, and I do think that Zoe is still pretty mana reliant, and you will struggle a little bit if you play no mana at all. So yeah, there are some other things you could try, but I really do think Ludens is just the best. So for your second item, though, there's a lot of choices. You can run a lot of different things. If you're not sure, I would just recommend running Horizon. So you can't really go wrong with Horizon. It's got a great stats for Zoe. The effect on it with the extra vision is really, really nice for you, and it's going to be good in basically every game. That being said, there are some items that can be better in some games. So for example, Shadow Flame. Shadow Flame is really, really good if you know the enemy team isn't going to build Matter Resist. So this is either if you're solo AP, or if the enemy team is just all squishy. What you really don't want is to go Shadow Flame and the enemy team buys a ton of MR and your flat pen gets countered. The reason you've got to be quite careful with this on Zoe is because Merc Treads for the Tenacity are very, very good into Zoe, so a lot of people will buy them, and that also happens to give Matter Resist, which means that Shadow Flame value on this champ, despite being quite good, is actually kind of hard to build. Like, I wouldn't find myself going Shadow Flame that often. How about Lichbane then? So Lichbane is kind of a competitor for Horizon where it's just a pretty good second item. I think Lichbane is a little overrated on Zoe, I'm going to be honest, but I think it's still pretty good. So nice things about Lichbane, just gives a lot of AP. A lot of the time you can weave an auto attack into your combo. Your empowered orders actually will do a lot of damage, and if you ever manage to push in the side lane, you can get a lot of damage on the turrets, which is really, really nice. That being said, sometimes you're not able to weave in the auto. Zoe's not a great sided laner. Like, it is kind of difficult to consistently hit turrets on this champ. And I think you'll find that if you buy Lichbane and you kind of look at how much damage it's done at the end of the game, it always seems to be kind of low. So yeah, it's still not bad. Like, the movement speed and stuff is good. Obviously, it scales quite well. But I actually think Horizon is better than Lichbane. But if you want to play Lichbane, like, be my guest. It's definitely at least decent. But I think it's a little overrated. Rocket Bell. This is kind of a weird one. So Rocket Bell in the meta is just a really OP item at the moment. It's very, very cheap and it gives great stats. The active is quite good for Zoe as well because you extend the range of your Q. It's also quite useful for helping proc Electrocute. But the other thing is that this, if you need health, this is probably the best way to get it because Zoe is not a champ that could, like, you know, you can't build Seraphs, you can't build Roa or anything. You don't want to build Cosmic because you're not playing Blackfire. So one of the issues of Zoe is, like, playing into Assassins can be kind of tough. And one of the ways to deal with that is having the extra movement, well, the extra dash and the health from Rocket Bell. So I don't actually think I built this anytime during this video, but just be aware that that is an option. And potentially you could even do Rocket Bell first item. I think if you did that, you would probably have to run double mana runes, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, that is an option as well. I would mostly have it as a second item though. Then third and fourth, most likely we're going Deathcap and Void. Now you can go Crippler. So Deathcap and Crippler, or rather Void and Crippler, is basically, do you want the haste or do you just want more M-Pen? Most champs prefer the haste, so Crippler is generally better for most. And to be honest, like, Zoe is still a good haste user, but, you know, this is going to give you more damage on your one-shots, right? So I think I find myself going Void more often, but if you want to play Crippler, it's totally fine. As for which order to get these in, it's basically just Deathcap third by default, but if they're buying Matter Resist, you can delay it to fourth, but try not to delay Deathcap past that point. Situational items, we've talked about Blackfire. I don't think it's great, but maybe you could try it if you want to play a really heavy haste build, but I really don't think it's that great. It's possible that there's some games where it's the best, but there's also not going to be great Zoe games, so you may want to avoid Zoe in those games in the first place. But again, if you're a one-trick, maybe there's some, like, games with full tanks where you're just playing, like, Blackfire Horizon and you're just throwing out as many bubbles as possible. Magi's pretty good on Zoe, but you have to be quite careful with it. You know, Zoe is a very vulnerable champ, and we'll talk about this a bit later, but she is really punished by hard engage, so be careful. You know, Darksteel is insanely good on Zoe. You should buy it every game. Magi's, on the other hand, only upgrade if you're really, really certain that you won't die. Zhonya's, I would say, is pretty bad on Zoe for the most part. If you buy Zhonya's, you're going to massively weaken your damage output, and yeah, I think it's better to get this defensive from something like Rocket Bell. The only time I'd really ever go Zonya would be as the last item, or maybe second if I were into something like Zed Karthus, you know, like the Absolute Dreams Zonya game, but for the most part, I'd stay away from it. Storm Surge, kind of weird to buy Storm Surge on Zoe. So typically on most champs, you go Storm Surge if you're too poor to afford Shadow Flame or you can't buy the rods. But the thing is, like, if that's the case on Zoe, you would just play Horizon instead. You know, that's a really easy item to build. So I don't really find myself going Storm Surge ever, but it's not a bad item, to be honest. Heal Cut, I would just say pretty much never buy Healing Cut on Zoe. Maybe if no one else on the team is buying it, you can. But the thing is, like, Zoe does not have reliable AoE. To be honest, she doesn't even have reliable damage. You know, like, you can easily just miss everything. But she also doesn't have dots. So, like, no AoE and no dots means it's, like, really hard to actually keep Healing Cut going. And again, massively nukes your damage. So, most of the time you can bring Heal Cup with Ignite if you really need it, or you can go Oblivion Orb and sit on it, but it feels really bad. Like, I'm trying not to build a Heal Cup basically ever. Cosmic can kind of be good, but it's only with Blackfire, you know, so like there is the synergy with the movement speed and the burn. Again, I think if you're in that kind of game, it's like if you need health, we're probably going Rockabelle. If you just needed haste, we can probably go Horizon. So I feel like it's not a great item in Zoe, and I probably wouldn't worry about it. Moving over to runes on Zoe, there's a lot you can do, especially with your minor runes, but let's kind of talk through the major points first. So I believe overall the Electrocute page is the best. So Electrocute, there's a lot of ways to proc it in lane, and if you can proc Electrocute, you'll almost certainly win the trade. It's great in skirmishing, it's great for your one-shots later on, so most of the time I do believe that Electrocute is the best keystone. Now, we can kind of talk a bit about Aerie in a bit, because the sorcery page is quite good, but it's not so much for Aerie as much as it is for sorcery. So we'll get to that. Now, your first choice mode is going Sudden Impact for Taste of Blood. So Sudden Impact actually scales really well on Zoe because you can very easily get the damage off by when you ult, it's going to give you the Sudden Impact proc, and then like your Ludens, even if you don't hit them, if you're like Ludens the wave, it'll bounce and proc your Sudden Impact damage. So you can get a lot of extra damage with this. The big problem is it's mostly a dead rune pre-level 6. Maybe you can get like one proc of it, like with your flash or whatever, but realistically, you're not going to get much value out of it. So sometimes, and especially in more contested matchups, you should probably go Taste of Blood, because if you don't have Taste of Blood and you just have like no rune pre-6, you're going to really struggle. But if you can get away with Sudden Impact, I think you should. Then down here, you can go Deep Ward or you can go Mementos. It doesn't really matter. Relentless Hunter is going to be the lock-in every time. Then for Sorcery, we have a lot of choices that we can go. So first one we have is between Mana Flow and Nimbus Cloak. You should. Then down here, you can go Deep Ward or you can go Mementos. It doesn't really matter. Relentless Hunter is going to be the lock-in every time. Deep Ward or you can go Mementos. It doesn't really matter. Relentless Hunter is going to be the lock-in every time. Then for Sorcery, we have a lot of choices that we can go. So first one we have is between Mana Flow and Nimbus Cloak. Personally, I prefer Mana Flow Band overall. I think that Zoe can really struggle with mana in the early game because you do use a lot of abilities on the wave. Now, Q is quite cheap, right? So you can spam Q on the wave quite a bit. But the thing is, like, you're queuing the wave to get them out of the way so you can, like, fish with bubbles. And bubbles are quite expensive. So I think Mana Flow translates into a lot of extra lane power. But, like, if you're in a game where you're more threatened or you want more scaling, or you're going to build like lots of mana early for whatever reason, I think Nimbus Cloak can be pretty powerful, especially if you're playing double combat sums. So if you're going something like, I don't know, Flash Ignite, and they have like a really scary ganking jungler and mid laner, maybe that's the game where you go Nimbus Cloak, right? Something you can think about. Then for your second rune slot here, we can go Transcendence for more scaling, or we can go Scorch for more laning power. This basically just depends on how much sustain the opponent has. So if you're against something with a lot of sustain, especially D shield second win champ, like if you're in a game where you're more threatened or you want more and overall, I think, but if you can get away with Sudden Impact, I think you should. Then down here, you can go Deep Ward or you can go Mementos. It doesn't really matter. Relentless Hunter is going to be the lock-in every time. Then for Sorcery, we have a lot of choices that we can go. So First one we have is between Mana Flow and Nimbus Cloak. Personally, I prefer Mana Flow Band overall. I think that Zoe can really struggle with mana in the early game because you do use a lot of abilities on the wave. Now, Q is quite cheap, right? So you can spam Q on the wave quite a bit. But the thing is, like, you're queuing the wave to get them out of the way so you can, like, fish with bubbles. And bubbles are quite expensive. So I think Mana Flow translates into a lot of extra lane power. But, like, if you're in a game where you're more threatened or you want more scaling, or you're going to build like lots of mana early for whatever reason, I think Nimbus Cloak can be pretty powerful, especially if you're playing double combat sums. So if you're going something like, I don't know, Flash Ignite, and they have like a really scary ganking jungler and mid laner, maybe that's a game where you go to Nimbus Cloak, right? Something you can think about. Then for your second rune slot here, we can go Transcendence for more scaling, or we can go Scorch for more laning power. This basically just depends on how much sustain the opponent has. So if you're against something with a lot of sustain, especially D-Shield second win champs, I'd recommend just going Transcendence because the Scorch damage won't stick. But if you're against something squishy, and especially, well, rather something without sustain that you can hit often, I would say take Scorch and just focus on killing them. But again, just realize that Scorch actually it scales a lot worse than Transcendence, right? So it is a pretty big trade-off, but it's also very, very powerful in the lane.
Si estás pensando en estudiar Asir.
Then let's come over here and talk about the Aerie page. There's also a spellbook page, which I'll mention briefly, and you'll see me use it in the video. But let's talk about this one first. So the Aerie page, which I'll mention briefly, and you'll see me use it in the video. But let's talk about this one first. So the Aerie page, the really good thing about this is while the Aerie keystone is not amazing, it gives you very, very powerful haste runes. So with this build, we've got Transcendence and, what's this called? Legend Haste. So if you were playing something like this, and then you're also playing like Blackfire Horizon, you're going to have super low cooldowns. And so I think this sort of page can be good into a tankier composition because you're just going to be spamming this over and over. Page can be good into a tankier composition because you're just going to be spamming this over and over. Now, there's kind of a weird thing to think about here because Aerie, so like Aerie is decent for poking in the lane, but you're unlikely to actually kill your opponent, right? Without like the electrocute all-in damage. So you have kind of a weird choice of it's like, well, we could go Scorch, and that kind of synergizes with our Aerie poke, but at the same time, like if we're playing this page where we're looking to scale, we probably want to go Gathering Storm. So it's kind of like a weird thing. I still think you base it off the matchup, but you're much more willing to go Gathering with Aerie compared to Gathering with Electrocute. So that's something you can think about. Of course, can still go Nimbus if you want. Then for your secondary runes, so we talked about earlier how potentially you could go something like first item Rockabelt or first item Storm Surge if you wanted. If you're doing that, you probably drop Cut Down and you play Presence of Mind instead, and you just play the double mana runes. I think that could fund that. Do I think that's worth it? Probably not, honestly. I would say it's, yeah, I don't really think it's worth it overall, but you can do that. The last page I'm going to mention, and you'll see it used in this video, is Spellbook Resolve. So Spellbook Resolve is just really, really good against really difficult assassin matchups. The Spellbook, you pretty much just swap to the defensive sums. Well, you swap 2 sums whenever they come up, and that's going to make you a lot harder to kill. And then Resolve, obviously, is very, very good against assassins. So with those, you can basically take whatever you want, but I would recommend taking Magic Boots, Triple Tonic, the one that gives you the elixirs. I'd probably take Cosmic for lower sum CD, and then I would just go secondaries like Bone Plating and Unflinching. But you'll see that in the video, and to be honest, you don't need to take that on Zoe very often because most of the time you can just play aggressively in your matchup, but that could be a thing sometimes, so it's something to just keep in mind. Now over to the matchups and then when to pick Zoe. So Zoe is quite good against things that need to move into her in order to trade. So something like Silas, where his trade is very telegraphed, like you have to jump into. It's quite easy to play against because it guarantees a bubble and you've got a ton of kill. And when to pick Zoe. So Zoe is quite good against things that need to move into her in order to trade. So something like Silas, where his trade is very telegraphed, like he has to jump into you. It's quite easy to play against because it guarantees the bubble and you've got a ton of kill threat onto him. So that's quite good. Weak laners like Taliyah also tend to be kind of good. Like Talia is a good neutralizer, but if you ever manage to get on her, you just kill her instantly. These are matchups where you can snowball very easily, and more importantly, they actually can't punish you. So while Zoe is a good laner, I'd say the mid game is where she really pops off, and there are some stronger laners that can kind of prevent you from reaching that point, but champs like Taliyah cannot. And then finally, things like Azir that really have like weak wave clear early, so you can like keep pushing them under turret and then also have to stand still in order to order, because, you know, like they can't cast while moving, like something like Syndra or Ori. These are very, very easy to harass. So yeah, most of the time when you're looking at your matchup, as long as it's not too difficult, you'll be fine. Like you don't need to worry that much about the matchup. There's just some things you want to avoid, and let's talk about those. So let's talk about the most common mistakes people make on Zoe. So the biggest mistake that I see people make, and the one that really tripped me up over and over when I was learning this champion, is ulting in at the wrong time. So I can't tell you how many times on Zoe. Let's talk about the most common mistakes people make on Zoe. So the cam. But the main thing I actually want to mention here is that when you're picking Zoe, it's way more important to look and end up doing a lot of damage to you. So and it's also kind of annoying in these champs because when you ult or something, but yeah, these matchups tend to be quite hard, and again, avoid them. Kind of need to play like a Psycho early and try and I don't think it's too bad to like kind of annoying because they have a lot of mobility. That much about the matchup. There's just some things you want to avoid, and let's talk about those. So assassins can be pretty tough. So like Neferi in particular, like the dogs can block your skill shots and her W can be used to dodge your bubbles. So try and stay away from Neferi. But most assassins can be kind of annoying because they have a lot of mobility. They can get on you in skirmishes. A lot of them can go D-shield second wind, which can make you snowballing quite hard. And while Zoe isn't useless from behind by any means, she's like OP when she's ahead, right? So you want to find a way to snowball. Try and I don't think it's too bad to like blind inverse these things, but I definitely wouldn't pick Zoe into them. Some of the strong laning mages like Warrior Syndra can be quite hard. Now you're actually really good against these champs in skirmishes, but in the 1v1 lane can be pretty tough. Normally when you're playing against these champs, you just kind of need to play like a Psycho early and like try ignite them, you know, try put your stuff on cooldown. Hopefully you get some ganks or you get some good like balloon drops so that you can all in them or something. But yeah, these matchups tend to be quite hard. and again, avoid them if possible. Finally, the last things that are kind of annoying are things that are really tanky. So something that builds Roa or something that has a lot of wave clear, like good neutralizers like Anivia, especially ones with gank setup, can be quite annoying for Zoe. And it's also kind of annoying in these champs because when you ult forward, you know, again, something like Lux Q or Anivia Q, a lot of the time they can catch you on the ult forward and end up doing a lot of damage to you. So try and stay away from these if you can. But the main thing I actually want to mention here is that when you're picking Zoe, it's way more important to look at the enemy support jungle than your mid matchup, to be totally honest. People always ask me, you know, what is the best champ against Zoe? And the real answer to that is Leona. You know, it's like Leona, it's Jarvan, it's Engage, basically. So if you're picking Zoe and enemy team does not have ganking junglers or ganking supports, especially if they're playing range supports, can't really gank you. Squishy ones, you know, are really, really good to play against. That's a dream Zoe game. But if you're playing into like a bunch of tanks, a bunch of hard engage, you're going to really struggle. Again, you can make it work. That might be the kind of game where you go Nimbus Cloak, maybe even go Spellbook. Like, you can make it work. But it is going to be kind of tough. So I tend to try and avoid playing against these champs. And so, yeah, like when you're looking to pick Zoe, I would, again, stay away from those, but also look for some sort of matchup where you can snowball. And that it can also be from ganking champs on your team. Like Zoe benefits a lot from chaos in the river. So having like skirmishers, having, you know, jungle gankers, support gankers is really, really nice. If the game looks chaotic, it's probably going to be very, very good for Zoe. And yeah, just try and stay away from tanks. One other thing I will mention is that because Zoe is like a Ludens and Burst user, she does prefer to be solo AP. But again, like there are haste builds, so like you can make it work, but I think she's much better as solo AP, especially because people will build mercs into you anyway. So playing duo AP might be workable, but playing like triple AP or more is already really bad, but it's even worse for Zoe. So just be aware of that. Finally, before we get into the games themselves, let's talk about the most common mistakes people make on Zoe. So the biggest mistake that I see people make, and the one that really tripped me up over and over when I was learning this champion, is ulting in at the wrong time. So I can't tell you how many times on Zoe I would ult forward to try and go for poke, and I'd immediately get poked or engaged on and die. Like I mentioned Leona already, but I seriously have nightmares of learning Zoe and just getting killed by Leona over and over and over. So you've got to be very, very careful. A lot of the time when you're playing team fights, you've got to be making sure you're ulting from over walls or from fog, or the enemies have already used cooldowns, or sometimes just don't ult forward until they've used stuff, right? Like you can just look to keep throwing out bubbles and keep being a nuisance. I think another one would be not, you know, putting the fight in a good spot before it starts. So while Zoe can, you know, have lots of impact in the team fight, if you can manage to land some poke before the fight starts, it's really, really impactful. So a good rule is to try be it like dragons, especially like the mid-game ones, like the 3rd and 4th or whatever. Try and be there like roughly 40 seconds before, because that way you can be in a spot where you can start poking and you can start holding the chokes. Again, it's somewhat dependent on like your bases and stuff. Like you won't be able to do it every time, but just pay attention to that in this video. You'll probably see me trying to be set up at these objectives early if I can. Other ones I can think of is probably grouping too much. So I always see this thing of like Zoe's weak on side lane, and that means like just don't side lane at all. And that's like not that in this video. You'll probably see me trying to be set up at these objectives early if I can. Other ones I can think of is probably grouping too much. So I always see this thing of like Zoe's weak on side lane, and that means like just don't side lane at all. And that's like not true. So Zoe is weak on side lane. That part's true, but that doesn't mean you just like don't play side, right? Like that's not really an option in modern day League of Legends. So again, you'll see all throughout this video that it's similar to the laning phase. Most of the time you want to push before moving, and that's the exact same in the mid game, right? You're trying to push the wave as far as you can. On Zoe, that might be a little less far than most champs, but then you'll look to rotate. That has the bonus of bringing someone away from mid to answer your side wave, and also it gives you an angle onto them, right? Like you can look to rotate, and potentially you can even hit some side lane turrets if all that goes wrong. So that's another thing, is I find people have very, very low CS on Zoe, but that's not really it's not a necessity, I guess. Like you can easily have high CS and high KP, so definitely look out for that. I think another one would be in the laning phase, making sure that you attack the back line a lot of the time instead of the front line. So what you want is when you're playing the lane, you want to kill the back line so that they have nothing to hide behind, but they're still forced to come up and CS the front line. So again, you won't always be able to do this, especially if you're in a more contested matchup. But if you're in an easy one, you know, it's a really consistent win condition to clear out the wave and then just zone them off, basically. And if they try and walk up, you hit a bubble and they die. If they don't, they bleed CS. So I sometimes see people playing too passively, but they probably don't even realize it, right? Like they're killing the front line, and then they're killing the back line, and then the enemy team or the enemy mid is like nothing to farm anymore, so they are not in range. And what ends up happening is you just stall out. You have this big lead, but you can't really find anything with it. So I think those are the most common mistakes. Again, make sure to check out the timestamps in the description below, because I'll tag each game with what I think the most important things are to learn from it. Otherwise, if you have any more questions, leave them in the comments section below or come check out my stream. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and enjoy the rest of the video. Okay, what do we got? Zoe versus Taliyah. So this matchup's pretty good.
Okay, that's gonna be it for today. I forgot to watch the video before playing. So yeah, I don't know if I will record myself watching the whole video every time, because I mean the video is really long. Well, I won't be watching it like all the video in one time, you know, but still, like, I don't think it's worth it to just record myself watching it, so I probably will watch it off camera from like from, I don't know how to say it, like from time to time, like maybe later I watch 20 more minutes of the video and so on, you know. But for now I don't feel like playing anymore today, like maybe tomorrow. So yeah, see you next time. Bye.